Hi everyone, welcome back to the TreeCoin podcast. It's Demian here, and I'm joined by my co-founder Sylph.
Woo!
And we're wanting to grow our following and love you guys to hit subscribe and check out all our socials. So today I want to ask you about some of your passion topics in the economics area. So this takes us back to early days conversation pre-founding the business, where you were just sharing perspectives on how human society has organised itself around currency, value, and the question I thought I'd just pop in is, are there examples in history of where societies have done a better job of aligning economics with, let's say, regenerative foundational aspects? Like there's quite a few like famous fails, like Easter Island got it wrong. I mean, they probably had a good time up until there was zero resources left, and they're kind of standing as a legacy of what happens if your way of running your economics of your society
Cuts out all the trees.
cuts out all the trees, literally, and then undermines not just the longevity, but the actual survivable viability. But are there in history some other examples where there's a bit of a better case study, and how did that feed into your thinking about TreeCoin early on?
Oh, that's a good question. We've got about 4 hours for this podcast. So there are lots of examples, and we talk about very, very modern history. So let's go back only the last, say, 3,000 years. Like very, very modern in terms of, if we keep going back, there's lots of different monetary systems, and there's lots of different cultural organization systems that we can roll back past the Sumerians. But if we talk about the system that we would recognize as money, ultimately I like to think of it very similar to a calendar. So from my perspective, whatever a culture puts at the center of its calendar, its entire society will revolve around that focus, right? So if we put the sun at the center of our Gregorian calendar, and the reason for that is we're interested in agriculture, we're interested in seasonal crop rotations and times. That's what we're going to keep looking at as the years roll by. We're not necessarily focusing on star systems that are rolling past us every 25,000 years, because we're not looking at that. If we had our calendar based on different things, like lunar calendars, then that would be ever present in our background consciousness. And so similar to that, I do believe that whatever kind of assets and commodities a society bases its money around, they become the fundamental focus, whether conscious or not, of the daily work and toil of the people. And so you've got lots of different cultures that have different commodities as their fundamental money. And the reason that is the way that it is because money is not something that was invented by someone with a great idea that thought, I'm going to do an organizing principle, and it wasn't invented by a government group. It's not something that was put together and then presented to the populace. It was naturally and organically found upon, and mutually arising in relationship to needs that humans had to organize themselves across time. So some of the really famous ones, like Japan famously had their yen sort of like wrapped around koku of rice, like bags of rice. And so rice, and they weren't the only, there's a really good example. We have lots of examples of similar food staple commodities as money. When you're trading bags of rice, koku of rice, that's your salary, that's your payment. Your whole culture's focused on food production. And so everyone's measuring their wealth in relationship to how much food is in generation in society, both their own town and their food and the food of the region, and even it might be the daimyo, like the lords of the regions, they were wealth compared in numbers of bags of rice.
But that sounds potentially like a good example of an asset class that has inherent value.
Yeah, I mean, money originally is some type of commodity that everyone wants, and the reason that it's usually chosen originally to be commodities like food is because if you get down to a staple, it's easy for me to grow greens and spinach and herbs in my back garden. It's not that easy for me to grow enough rice myself. So we come together as a village and grow rice. Maybe we all want rice. So if you're a dentist, I think I've used this one as my favorite either dentist or fish are my two kind of go-to. If you're a dentist and I'm a labourer, let's say, and we meet at the market one day, and this is in a society where there's no money, and so it's just an exchange of mutual goods. We run into some key problems. One is that your services have to arrive at the exact time and quantity as my demands require it in that moment. We don't have a way of trading across time. So if I really need dental work and you're a dentist, that's great for me. But if the only thing I have to offer in exchange is labor, I'm a house builder, let's say, and I come to you and say, I really need dental work, and you're like, great, I'm open today for dentistry. What do you provide? And I say, I can do house building, and you're like, actually, I'm good, I don't need any house building done today. We run into a problem of like, we can't trade. So it's called the double coincidence of wants dilemma, that your wants and needs have to match my wants and needs. So society worked out quite quickly that it could put an intermediary in between. What would you and I both want all the time, regardless of the day, or probably maybe food, not exotic food, but the fundamental food, staples, rice. Problem with rice is it goes off. It's also very hard to, bags and bags, wheelbarrows of rice to swap for things. So society starts to try out assets that are more durable and more fungible, things that can be cut and melted, and they're still worth the same. If I take my kilo of gold and saw it in half, the two halves are technically still worth the same. If I take a piece of art and cut it in half, the two halves are not sellable for the same amount. So art is not fungible, and gold is an example of something that is fungible. But you can see that the problem as you go is you start to move away from food being the focus of your economic transactions, and now it's metal being the focus. And that means that if you're not careful as a society, you can kind of forget that you can't eat metal. That's not what sustains you in your day-to-day life.
So is that like part of the kind of problem that was part of the thinking in the run-up to TreeCoin sort of genesis, that we've got societies now that are backed by non-sustaining assets?
Yeah, and I think as we walk further away from things that are directly tied to human benefit, human flourishing, like food, for example, and we move towards metal, gold, and silver bars, it's better, and it brings with it qualities that food just doesn't have. Like I can't save for a long time in food. I can't store my rice for 30 years and build capital. I actually have to consume all of it in a short period of time, like 3, 4, 5 years at best.
Yes.
So I am constrained. My society can't fund 100-year projects, because we have to keep eating all the capital before it goes off. But as we move here, we're constrained by the natural supply. So for example, gold still keeps us, meaning we can't go crazy, and we can't start funding things and borrowing from the future too far, because there's a very limited 1.3% every year of additional gold find. So I'm still constrained. What we've done in the last, since Bretton Woods in the 1940s, and then definitely since Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard in the 1970s in America, now it's just debt. So since 1970s, the US dollar is just backed by nothing but credit, swapped by petrol. So you have to get it to get petrol. That was the genius of the 1970s, right? And even that's starting to change. So if you get to a point where you're like, it's not even that our currency is actually constrained by anything. It's definitely not representative of food and things that are life-sustaining for humans. It's now just an imaginary game of credit and future owing. But the risk is people's day-to-day toil will be focused on debt, on credit, on consuming now from the future. And so agriculture is not in the minds of most people, I would say, at least to the point that it's not the center of their day-to-day toil. And a question around TreeCoin was thinking, I wonder what would be something that would be an asset class that could underlie a transactable currency. Like, we're not there yet, TreeCoin's goal is to be used as a utility token for carbon retirement, and so a lot of this musing is about potential future use cases. That's like a big picture, long-term thing. Maybe we'd like to get there one day. I wonder what could be an asset class that almost all humans have access to, because not everyone has access to gold mines, not everyone has access to oil rigs, not everyone has access to rice paddies, right? We're thinking trees are very consistent. Different trees, but the idea of a tree and plant life that's across the globe. And humans, most of our food and foraging, forest, agriculture, there's trees involved in that process. You know, jungle foraging or maintaining boundaries, even whole, say like wheat fields might still be wrapped in trees, or the land is growable for trees. So it was thinking, I wonder if trees could be an asset that if we held, and if we put them at the center of my focus, the currency I want to gain, or the asset I want to gain, and in my trading, I actually keep demanding more trees. If I want to build up a huge bank account of capital, of TreeCoin, the only way of doing that is that there's more trees. There's no other way of getting that. And once TreeCoin almost has already engaged all of the existing trees on Earth, all the forests that currently exist have already joined TreeCoin. Any additional TreeCoin that is demanded, it's like it has to come from more trees. So that's the idea, that maybe people would start to consciously or unconsciously demand the thing, and that trees as a net good for humanity, you know, reducing soil erosion, maintaining more stable temperatures and climates within the forest ecosystems, managing water vapor and keeping like higher wet fields and wet patches and moist soils.
Yeah, and the global climate atmospheric balance solution. And
massive drawdown of carbon.
Yeah.
And then the output of oxygen.
Yeah.
So it's like then if I demand trees to be planted here in Australia, the overall reduction of carbon and the overall expansion of oxygen that they provide is of net benefit to people in Africa and in England. And in
and in the globally interconnected world that's facing a climate challenge, that's what piqued my interest at the very beginning. It's like the sheer power of the idea to shift society's focus to a life-sustaining asset and to have a much brighter future. Rather than an abstract society that's kind of chasing after abstract assets, which, like you say, are borrowing from the future against a debt that, in the case of climate, can't be repaid because we'll be like bubbling up, the sea level rising, and you don't get to repay when your CBD's underwater. We'll be all right because we're going to fix this, but still, it's like it's just not the right thinking for a sustainable plan.
No, and I think like any society that borrows from the future, which it does when it's debt. I mean, debt, ironic. Debt's quite simple. Debt and credit. If I go into debt, it's because I want to move purchasing from tomorrow to today. So let's say that I was actually working and generating my farm of wheat, and I kept accruing wheat, and then every year there was a certain amount of wheat, and then I had a certain amount of dollar payment for that. And I was saving up, and then I spent that as cash, and I bought an asset. That took time. Like I couldn't do that. Maybe I needed 10 years of this wheat bill to buy that farm. If I get really anxious and I'm like, I want the farm today, the only way of doing that is to bring I'm not actually a real estate client in 10 years from now. I'm not going to be there as a buyer in 10 years. I'm going to pull the real estate purchase into today's world. And I do that by borrowing all of the work I should have done for the next 9 to 10 years to get that. That becomes a promise to do, and the asset comes here. If I'm not careful and I'm like, well, I'm not going to bother producing the wheat, or I'm just going to go bankrupt, or this is just funny money, I don't actually have to generate the thing anymore. Well, society loses out, because society were really benefiting from the tons of wheat that I was generating. If lots of people do that, or if the way of getting, maybe it's faster to speculate on the stock market than it is to produce real assets and real commodities like wheat farms, then society slowly sees less and less actual commodities and actual goods and services being swapped and produced, and more borrowings and debt and promises for the future.
Yeah.
Which, exactly as you said, well, at a certain point, if you just run out of food, you can't feed the people to work for the next 10 years in order to be able to pay off the debt. Like, there is a balancing point where you can only borrow so much from the future before the amount you borrow is unpayable back.
Yeah, and I guess I maybe kind of take a quantum leap to the climate picture, like I said, with we were kind of putting this depth of temperature problem into the future. I mean, it's already in the present, but it's really exponential in the future. So it's like pouring against the wrong bank. Whereas we flip that all around, life-sustaining asset, something like TreeCoin. Maybe just to wrap it up, final question is, what do you see as possible in a TreeCoin expanded future?
Ooh, that's a solid question for the next 3-hour podcast.
What's a sort of a nugget of how you'd like to see? Look, if you cast yourself to, the end of your career, and what you'd like to see looking back, having founded TreeCoin, and by the time you get there, what would you like to see?
I think the two really big things that stand out are the world reforested, just trees valued for more than their beautification, aspect. That they really are put back at the center of. I believe that they should be put back at the center of human society, as not just like a timber resource, but the wildlife and the biodiversity and the beauty and the management of society and just the gorgeousness of living around a green environment. That becomes the world starts to retree, and we reduce this crazy deforestation that's going on. That starts to reduce back to zero, and that every year by year, we're making positive gain in new forest plantation. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And the second thing would be that the distribution of wealth and the ability for people in second and third world countries to have an asset that they can directly trade with the West, that they can manage and grow, and it's a benefit to all of us. It's not just oil and gold. That would be awesome to see, that second and third world citizens get an opportunity to take part in the global financial system with an asset that it's real, it's tangible, it's wanted. It's not charitable handouts that rely on this altruism. It's everyday, normal, transactable human interactions. And I feel like the satisfaction and the pride that comes, as in being involved in being in business and providing services.
Yeah.
There's great pride and satisfaction in being able to provide a service for people. I want to bring that to everyone in the world. So if you're on a small island and you've got coconut trees, but you don't have a gold mine, now you can take part in the global financial system.
And I think, just to wrap it up, I think it's, from my perspective, it is something that the Western world, the more developed countries, the richer part of the globe are ready for, this kind of solution. So thanks for joining. Very fun podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hit subscribe for more of good stuff that's coming next. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.